Time might not be the only reasonable measure of art. Most of you quickly forget. Some of it gives a moment of beauty. Selected pieces mark an age. Only precious few pieces of artwork are for all time, and those made by William Shakespeare are eternal. The bard's artistic achievements flow through our veins. His plays are echoes of the emotions that define human experience across centuries. Love and hate, pleasure and pain, life and death. Shakespeare's stories portrayed the essence of our soul beyond ages. But for quite a few people, those plays are just too much for William Shakespeare. So, if this man didn't write them, who did? What reasons did they have for ghostwriting and not using their real name? Welcome to Intrigued Mind, and join us today in the adventure of finding if Shakespeare was who we really think he was. Shakespeare's plays are probably the most outstanding and influential body of work of modern drama. His plays were famous when he wrote them, and have long been influential in drama, poetry, and filmmaking, lasting until today. Topics like the tragic nature of romance or the dialogue with our internal voices are still relevant in plays and movies. It was Shakespeare who underlined them like never before. He showed us his vision of corruption in politics with historical dramas. He expressed love for popular culture and romantic comedies. He portrayed the absurdity of our deepest pains with tragic comedies, and the chaos in human nature is exposed in his tragedies. But if we look at Shakespeare's private life records, we don't find a wealth of information. We know that he was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, England, probably a couple of days before being baptized on the 26th of April, 1564. His father John was a successful glovemaker, and his mother Mary Arden, the daughter of an affluent land-owning farmer. He was the third of 8 children and the eldest surviving son. There are no attendance records from the local schools. Still, most biographers agree that Shakespeare was probably educated at the King's New School in Stratford. In 1582, at the age of 18, Shakespeare married 26-year-old Anne Hathaway. After 6 months, they had a daughter called Susanna, and after 2 years, twins, Hamnet and daughter Judith. There is no evidence of his life for 7 years until he is mentioned as part of the London theatre scene in 1592. The playwright Robert Greene criticised his tiger's heart wrapped in a player's heart in the magazine Groat's Worth of Wit. After 1594, Shakespeare's plays were performed only by the Lord Chamberlain's Men Company. After the death of Queen Elizabeth in 1603, when awarded a royal patent by the new King James I, it was renamed as King's Men. Shakespeare's plays were published in quarto editions, first anonymous and since 1598 with his name, which quickly became a selling point by itself. He was a writer and an actor, taking part in his own and others' plays. His name is on several cast lists year after year until 1605. From this point, his career as an actor diminished. After 1610, Shakespeare wrote fewer plays, and after 1613, none are attributed to him. His last 3 plays were collaborations, probably with John Fletcher, who succeeded him as the King's Men's House playwright. Shakespeare died on the 23rd of April 1616 at the age of 52, within a month of signing his will. This document described his health as perfect, so there is some intrigue about the cause of death. Half a century later, John Ward, the vicar of Stratford, wrote, "Shakespeare Drayton and Ben Jonson had a merry meeting and, it seems, drank too hard, for Shakespeare died of a fever there contracted." After his death, the contrast between a relatively simple lifestyle and such an influential and innovative art gave rise to several theories that share a common thesis. An anonymous mastermind is behind Shakespeare's genius. How could a man born in such a small city like Stratford-upon-Avon acquire the knowledge to write about Elizabethan court, multiple languages, law, astronomy, music, military, and foreign lands? There are no records of travel or contact with these worlds that explain how he came up with such a deep understanding of those disciplines and places. Traces of an aristocratic world are all around his artwork, but not in his life experience. It is not easy to connect a middle-class man raised in such a small town to 16th century high society. Plays like Hamlet, for instance, show a profound knowledge of Denmark and the machinations that occurred to royal families in the European monarchies. But there is no record of Shakespeare travelling to Denmark or having been part of a royal court. A similar situation happens with Othello. It was set in Venice and Cyprus, two places that were probably never visited by the bard. In Shakespeare's will, written 1 month before his death, there is no reference to books or manuscripts. Is it not something that should be part of the property of a playwright genius? Those theories that call into question Shakespeare's authorship emerged in the 19th century after resolving another debate, whether his work was really all that great. Some prominent people have questioned Shakespeare's authorship: Charlie Chaplin, Sigmund Freud, Malcolm X, Helen Keller, and even Shakespearean actors like Derek Jacobi and Mark Rylance have all expressed doubts. In July 2019, at the funeral of the Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, his eulogy said that he much appreciated the writings of the literary genius known by the name William Shakespeare. Stevens believed in what is known as the Oxfordian theory. It was proposed in 1920 by the schoolteacher J. Thomas LOONEY. He said that behind Shakespeare was Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford, an aristocrat who could not publish under his own name for personal reasons. There is a different theory pointing out the particular features in some female characters in Shakespeare's plays. There were strong and intense women beyond the standards of their time, struggling in a world shaped by men. How could a man like Shakespeare understand so clearly this part of the women's experience? The researcher John Hudson and journalist Elizabeth Winkler believe that Shakespeare was the pseudonym used by the Italian poet Emilia Bassano. Bassano's life and social background and her supposed Jewish heritage would explain some topics that can be found in Shakespeare's plays. Why would she give the credit for her work to a random actor? Because a woman couldn't write all that controversial content at that time. With this information, is it possible to say that Shakespeare was a fraud? Let's take a recheck on the proof that we just analyzed, but now from another perspective. Do we really have little information on Shakespeare's life? Compared to an artist 2 centuries later, perhaps. But in fact, it is a lot more than average records from other people from his time. Doubts related to Shakespeare's branch of knowledge can be answered with more straightforward theory than false authorship: books. Several scholars and artists defined his work as the result of the most outstanding research in the history of drama. How did he achieve this? Simple. He read. Stories like Hamlet and Othello and places like Denmark or Italy could have been perfectly traced with proper research, flair, and hard work. From the ancient Greeks until today, stories do not usually come from the author's personal experience, but from observation, study, and empathy of the human condition. Even so, some people argue on the internet that Shakespeare was inspired in some way by discarnate entities. Some go as far as saying that he simply had all the experience he needed from the king's court and abroad in previous lives. About his origins and education, there is this idea that he was poor and illiterate, but he wasn't. As we said, his father, John, was an alderman and a successful glover. His mother, Mary, was the daughter of an affluent landowning farmer. Stratford was a small city with no records of those years' school attendance. Nevertheless, the young William likely got from his parents the regular education that a middle-class family of his time could provide. And what did he learn there? Grammar school curricula were broadly similar. The basic Latin and intensive education in grammar based upon classical Latin authors. It fits with an average background for a playwright. What about the books and the manuscripts missing from his will? Well, if you apply Occam's razor, where the simplest answer is the likeliest, Shakespeare just dealt with that problem personally before dying. That's it. Famous people supporting the Edward de Vere Oxfordian theory often had their own reasons too. For example, Sigmund Freud used Hamlet as part of his Oedipus complex, on the belief that Shakespeare wrote the play following the death of his father. After he learned it was probably written before, he switched to the Earl of Oxford theory of authorship. What about Shakespeare's lack of eulogies after his death? Well, he was not recognized in his time as an absolute genius as today. There are records related to felonies and trials after ripping off some close associates. It is known that, like his contemporary colleague Christopher Marlowe, he was a regular drinker. It is believed that he died after some sort of long party in the night of 1616. So, probably after being a rock star of his time, his personal life was kind of chaotic, and his social image was not precisely at its best. The idea that Shakespeare's empathy for women and the revolutionary female characters that he created means that Emilia Bassano is the mastermind behind his work is just random. Even the people who support Bassano's theory recognize that the most important thing, which is the writing style, is not connected in tone and structure. Edward de Vere and Emilia Bassano are not the only candidates for being the real writers behind Shakespeare's Wikipedia list of authorship candidates. It contains 87 names, including the entire orders of the Jesuits and the Rosicrucians, the Queen of England, Elizabeth Manners, and even Daniel Defoe, who was active after the bard's death. In the late 19th century, a Polish philosopher named Wincenty Lutoslawski formalized a method known as stylometry. It can prove whether different pieces of writing came from the same person or not. William Shakespeare, the Bard of Avon, passed the stylometer test. His lifetime work is consistent and only shows cooperation with a couple of other writers, like Christopher Lowe, something that, by the way, was common in those years. Some geniuses are maybe too amazing to accept. We imagine extraordinary and exciting private lives. It's hard to admit when they are just citizens like you or me, and the idea of a genius forged with hard work is just too boring. In this 21st century, in the middle of the internet age, theories like this are growing faster than ever. Shakespeare's authorship is an old one that is coming back to life again. But we can always use our critical thinking to question those theories. Double-checking facts and analyzing them is usually the shortest path to the truth. One thing we know for sure, Shakespeare plays are indeed for all time, and this is what matters the most. For more videos on the latest amazing forgotten parts of history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.